Welcome to the Reparenting Daily podcast. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into reparenting, exploring tools and resources to help us through our journey. The podcast is divided into 3 sections. First is a reading. Second is a discussion of the reading, followed by a journal prompt. And the last section is a peaceful meditation for closing. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever and whenever you're joining us today. Thank you for being here for another day of reparenting. Today we're going to do something a bit different. We're not going to be looking at psychology articles or really any traditional self-help literature. We're going to take a step back and, open ourselves up to some new types of material. For example, classic literature. One thing that I've realized or that I had been pondering about is because I grew up without, the older wisdom being passed down, from grandparents or even the mother and father, is that I missed a lot of the basic understandings of human connection, how humans work, socializing, and just basically an understanding of social psychology. And a lot of that can be picked up by literature, is one thing that I realized, and especially a literature that is written from a perspective that is character focused, in the sense that it really explores multiple characters, feelings, ideas, thoughts, emotions, internal experiences. And so reading these types of literature also gives us those insights and tips. And so for that reason, I'll be incorporating some of that into the program going forward. Without further ado, let's get started on the reading. Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. One morning, when Gregor Samsa woke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. He lay on his armor-like back, and if he lifted his head a little he could see his brown belly, slightly domed and divided by arches into stiff sections. The bedding was hardly able to cover it, and seemed ready to slide off at any moment. His many legs, pitifully thin, compared with the size of the rest of him, waved about helplessly as he looked. "What's happened to me?" he thought. It wasn't a dream. His room, a proper human room, although a little too small, lay peacefully between its 4 familiar walls. A collection of textile samples lay spread out on the table. Samsa was a traveling salesman, and above it there hung a picture that he had recently cut out of an illustrated magazine and housed in a nice gilded frame. It showed a lady fitted out with a fur hat and a fur boa who sat upright, raising a heavy fur muff that covered the whole of her lower arm towards the viewer. Gregor then turned to look out the window at the dull weather. Drops of rain could be heard hitting the pane, which made him feel quite sad. How about if I slept a little bit longer and forget about all this nonsense, he thought. But that was something he was unable to do because he was used to sleeping on his right. And in the present state, he couldn't get into that position. However hard he threw himself onto his right, he always rolled back to where he was. He must have tried 100 times. Shut his eyes so that he wouldn't have to look at the floundering legs, and only to stop where he began to feel a mild, dull pain there that he had never felt before. Oh God, he thought, what a strenuous career it is that I've chosen. Traveling day in and day out, doing business like this takes much, much more effort than doing your own business at home. And on top of that, there's the curse of traveling, worries about making train connections, bad and irregular food, contacts with different people all of the time so that you can never get to know anyone or become friendly with them. It can all go to hell. He felt a slight itch on his belly, pushed himself slowly up on his back towards the headboard, so that he could lift his head better, found where the itch was, and saw it was covered with lots of little white spots, which he didn't know what to make of. And when he tried to feel the place with one of his legs, he drew it quickly back, because as soon as he touched it, he was overcome by a cold shudder. He slid back into his former position. Getting up early all the time, he thought, it makes you stupid. You've got to get enough sleep. Other traveling salesmen live a life of luxury. For instance, whenever I go back to the guest house during the morning to copy out the to copy out the contact, these gentlemen are always sitting there eating their breakfast. I ought to just try that out with my boss. I'd get kicked out on the spot. But who knows? Maybe that would be the best thing for me. If I didn't have my parents to think about, I'd have given them my notice a long time ago. I'd have gone up to the boss and told him just what I think. Tell him everything I would. Let him know just what I feel. He'd fall right back off the desk. And it's a funny sort of business to be sitting up there at your desk, talking down to your subordinates from up there, especially when you have no right to go up close because the boss is hard of hearing. Well, there's still some hope. Once I've got the money together to pay off my parents' debt to him, another 5 or 6 years, I suppose, that's definitely what I'll do. That's when I'll make the big change. First of all, I've got to get up. My train leaves at 5. He looked over at the alarm clock, ticking on the chest of drawers. Good heaven, he thought. It was 6:30, and the hands were quietly moving forward. It was even later than 6:30, more like 6:45. Had the alarm not rung? He could see from the bed that he had set it for 4 o'clock, as it had been set. It certainly must have rung. Yes, but was it possible to quietly sleep through that furniture rattling noise? True, not had he slept peacefully, but probably all the more deeply because of that. What should he do now? The next train went at 7. If he were to catch that, he would have to rush like mad, and the collection of samples was still not packed. And he did not feel at all particularly fresh and lively. And even if he did catch the train, he would not avoid his boss's anger, as the office assistant would have been there to see the 5 o'clock train go. He would have put in his report about Gregor's not being there a long time ago. And the office assistant was the boss's man, spineless and with no understanding. What about if he reported sick? But that would be extremely strange and suspicious, as in 15 years of service Gregor had never once yet been ill. His boss would certainly come around with the doctor from the medical insurance company and accuse his parents of having a lazy son, and accept the doctor's recommendation. Not to make any claim, as the doctor believed that no one was ever ill, but that there were many work shy. And what's more, he would have been entirely wrong in this case. Gregor did, in fact, apart from excessive sleepiness after sleeping for so long, feel completely well, and even felt much hungrier than usual. He was still hurriedly thinking all this, though, unable to decide to get out of bed when the clock struck 7:15. There was a cautious knock at the door near his head. "Gregor?" someone called. It was his mother. "It's 7:15. Don't you want to go somewhere?" That gentle voice. Gregor was shocked when he heard his own voice answering. It couldn't hardly be recognized as the voice he had before. As if from deep inside him there was a painful and uncomfortable squeaking mixed in with it. The words could not be made out at first, but then there was a sort of echo which made them unclear. leaving the hearer unsure whether he had heard properly or not. Gregor had wanted to give a full answer and explain everything, but in the circumstances contented himself with saying, "Yes, mother, yes, thank you, I'm getting up now." The change in Gregor's voice could probably not be noticed outside, though, the wooden door, as his mother was satisfied with the explanation and shoved away. But this sort of conversation made the other members of the family aware that Gregor, against their expectations, was still at home. And soon his father came knocking at one of the side doors, gently, but with his fist. Gregor, he called. "What's wrong?" And after a short while, he called again, without a warning deepness in his voice. Gregor! At the other side of the door, his sister came plaintively. "Gregor, are you well? Do you need anything?" Gregor answered to both sides, "I'm ready now," making an effort to remove all the strangeness from his voice by enunciating very carefully and putting long pauses between each individual word. His father went back up to breakfast, but his sister whispered, "Gregor, open the door, I beg of you." Gregor, however, had no thought of opening the door and instead congratulated himself for his cautious habit, acquired from his traveling, of locking all doors at night, even when he was at home. Thank you, and that's the reading for today. Welcome back. Thanks again for being here and having some patience with this new experimental type reading that we'll do today. As you heard, there was no direct lesson basically from this reading, but if you've been listening to the readings previously and if you've been doing some recovery work, you will definitely notice some themes coming up already from the beginning short passage that we read. And we started from the very beginning to about page 5 or 4 in the PDF, which I will also put in the show notes. This is in the public domain because it's quite old. If you're not aware of this story, it's a Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Franz Kafka is an author from the 19th century from Hungary. I believe he was living in Budapest when he was writing this story, who had a very challenging relationship with his father and his family. Basically, he was an adult child. He was parentified and not allowed to become himself. But obviously we didn't know what that was back then, but he's explaining the chaos of being unable to realize your identity because of your external family pressures. He comes from the dysfunctional family. He is an ACOA. And so he's writing about our experience before people even knew what was going on. And so that's why this book is actually really interesting, because the short story is about a man who wakes up, who is a traveling salesman, who is actually responsible for paying his family's life because they're not working, and he is financially responsible for supporting the entire family. And simultaneously, you heard that he hated his job. He doesn't want to be there. He finds it miserable. He wants to cuss out his boss and quit the job. But he has all of these expectations and pressure from his family. He's getting some kind of benefit of self-esteem or pride, but he also just hates what he's doing and it's not fulfilled. His boss is abusing him. His father is aggressively abusing him. And as you read this story, it's really a story about shame. I'm not going to tell you the ending of this book because I think it's really good that you check out, either read the rest of this PDF or listen to the audiobook, or if you don't want to do that, you can listen to a summary or read a summary online or on YouTube. But it's a really good story, just to get you thinking through some of the terms and concepts that we've been thinking. The narcissistic abuse from his father. I mean, his father has no concern for him at all, as you will read and go through the novel. I don't want to say too much to give away the ending of the novel because it's a really good story, and I hope that you will start to see some of the patterns and how they reflect the themes we've been talking about, and therefore I hope you will see the value in reading a book like this because you get to see this externalized. And this book is even mimicking some of Kafka's own personal life experiences. So that's how he's able to write this. What's really interesting is that Kafka became famous posthumously, and so after his death, his works were found because he was someone who had such shame himself about his own work, his masterpieces. He didn't even publish them. He wanted them to be burned, and luckily his friend decided to publish them after his death. Else we wouldn't have even known. That's because he had so much doubt and internalized shame from his father situation, which is also reflected by Gregor and his father in this novel, The Metamorphosis. So again, it's a very profound piece of literature that I think will give you many lessons, that will provide some sense of belonging and understanding in the world. And it's a classic piece of literature that really helps you to see the world through new eyes. And so today, even though you will probably not read the rest of this or before the journaling or meditation today, whenever you're listening, take some time to think about the impact of shame in your life, because that is really where this story is going. Even from the first section we read, let's look at that dynamic. Gregor in this novel is forced to work at a job for someone else's benefit, and those people are still abusing him. And the societal expectations require him to remain in this position because, especially in this period of time, it's challenging to leave your family. And it's still challenging for us who want to step away from our families to leave. So imagine back then, it's not possible at all. Most likely, or even, it must have been even much more challenging. So people were probably more likely to be stuck with their abusive families. And so leaving your family has always been a challenging thing. Breaking and separating from them, if that is necessary. Because when someone gets there, it is not something that people make as a light decision. It's something that takes lots of contemplation, and it comes with a lot of pain and grief. So it's not the decision that I think we should be judging people for, like a lot of people do in society, to shame us, to say that, it's your mother and father, you cannot turn your back on them. It's taking us back to this book and this abusive situation. Again, is your shame, reflecting on shame today and the journal prompt, is your shame so deep that you are being or have been kept in situations which are damaging you spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally? Has your shame, can you imagine a situation in your life where you have felt stuck, but knowing you have, from an intellectual standpoint, knowing you have the capacity to leave, but your emotions of shame are weighing you down like an anchor to the bottom of the sea? Reflect on the impact that shame can really have on your ability to make choices, your ability to identify and pursue your needs, the guilt that can arise, that Gregor must feel. He cannot leave his job, right? Because he will take care of his family. And you'll be surprised to see how the book ends. Because that would also give you a very different way to reflect on this. So once you do finish the story, actually do this reflection now before reading the end of the story. If you listen to this journal prompt and reflect on that, then go back and finish this story, either reading the book, the summary, whatever you decide to do, and then listen to this prompt again. And just to see how things change based on how this novel ends. So that was a bit of a longer episode than usual today. But as always, thank you for being here. Take care of yourself and be well. And now, let us move on to the final section, the meditation. This is an unguided meditation. I will simply provide some music and you can take some time to relax. Please feel free to choose a location and a place where you feel safe and where you can be undisturbed for the next 10 minutes. You can choose to be sitting down, standing, as you like, wherever you are most comfortable. Thank you for being here and enjoy the meditation.